Welcome everyone. We are super excited to have so many in the room already. My name is Nosizo Savake. I'm a researcher at the CSIR, and together with Mark, Renee, Dimakatso, and Majubu, we hold the responsibility of managing the Urban Knowledge Exchange Southern Africa. And we are excited to be holding and hosting the second webinar. Our first webinar took place over 2 months ago, and in that session we had panelists discuss the role of knowledge and data platforms in monitoring and predicting change, and we'll post a link to that, the recording for that session. Thank you very much for attending our session today. We will be looking at and really grateful to have our two panelists today, will be presenting to us two multi-partner platforms that process large data sets and provide tools to support decision-making in complex and dynamic urban and regional environments. We look forward to a discussion a little bit later. We will be having two presentations, one from Amy and then followed by Justin. And following that, we will have your questions during the session in the chat, but do keep in mind that if you want to have verbal questions, there will be a time to have that. We ask that just to help run the program a little bit smoothly, that you keep your cameras off and your mics muted during the session. And yeah, you will have an opportunity to have conversations a little bit later. So I would like to hand over to Mark to facilitate our presentations. Thanks, Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Cesar, for introducing. I'm just going to quickly introduce the topic for the day and then hand over to our two speakers. And we'll follow a format of presenting first and then going into a panel discussion, and then at the end, opening it up for discussion. Thank you, Cesar, for emceeing for the day. Our two speakers are Dr. Justin Visagie of the Human Sciences Research Council and Ms. Amy Peterser of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. With the CSR being the custodian of the Urban Knowledge Exchange Southern Africa, or uKESA.info, we're very pleased to be hosting today's session, and we're co-hosting it this time with the HSRC, the South African Cities Network, and the University of the Free State. And we'd like to thank them for joining us in this effort, and thank you all for coming. The webinar series, as Cesar has implied, it's there to provide a platform to share about knowledge initiatives from around the country and across the region. And today we have two initiatives to discuss. They're both multi-partner initiatives. They both work on a spatial data platform that provides tools for decision making, and they're particularly useful for understanding urbanization, climate change, and shifting economic conditions. The first initiative we'll hear about is the Spatial Economic Activity Data South Africa, or SEED SA project, and its spatial tax data portal. It houses the South African spatial tax information, appropriately aggregated, and it makes it simple to explore and download the data. And it also includes a number of tools for building maps, for exploring different themes that are focused on municipalities at that scale and are about economic growth, industry, diagnostics, and equitable economies. So as I've mentioned, Dr. Visagie will present this. He's a senior research specialist at the HSRC, and his work focuses on urban economics and development economics, as well as microeconomic research. He is also a senior lecturer at the University of the Free State. So, and I'll leave Justin to talk more about the different partnerships and stakeholders. The second initiative, the Green Book. The Green Book is an online platform that provides a planning support tool based on quantitative scientific evidence on the likely impacts of climate change and urbanisation and what impact these will have on South Africa's cities and towns. And it also presents adaptation actions that can be implemented by local government. So it's a very useful tool. And again, a lot of different partners that are involved. This is being presented by Amy Peterser today. She's an urban planner and a senior researcher at the CSR. Her expertise includes climate change, adaptation planning, mainstreaming, and policy analysis at the local government planning level. So our hope is that by the end of the session, you will understand the platforms better and the various entry points and tools that they offer. And after the first round of presentations, we'll have a discussion around two issues: the impacts that the projects are setting out to achieve and what activities go alongside the online platforms to make them more successful and to increase their effectiveness. Feel free to post comments and questions in the chat. Feel free to introduce yourselves and to say who you're from or where you're from. And I'd like to thank the speakers again. So we'll kick off with Justin. And again, thank you so much to the speakers for coming and for everyone for attending. Justin, over to you.
Great, thanks, Mark. And thanks everyone for tuning in, being here. Just going to share my screen. Okay. I must apologize that in these days of home office, I'm renovating. So I've told the renovators to be quiet for the next while, but I hope it works. So today I'm just going to be presenting more information about our spatial tax portal, but it's really important to understand the context of how it all fits together. And it would be amiss of me for not starting at the very top and just asking the question, does geography matter? This picture you can see on the screen is obviously quite provocative, but I think it captures, in essence, something that we understand intuitively, and that is that space really matters when understanding the world, depending on which side of the fence or which side of the road or neighborhood you grow up on can make all the difference. And the economy is no different. The types of economic activities that we expect to find and the realistic chances of business success depend on the particular locality that a place finds itself in. And whilst traditional splits between urban and rural or different provinces in South Africa are of course important, it happens at every scale, even within our cities, between different places. And so, because of all of this, spatial economic activity data, or SEED-SA, which I'm going to be talking about today, is trying to solve this big problem, which is that South Africa has lacked credible data about the local economy. And of course, this is a big issue, because how do you plan for more productive, inclusive, and sustainable cities if you don't have good enough economic data? How can local stakeholders advocate for change or hold leaders to account if they don't know what's happening in their communities? And ultimately, jobs and investment happen in a particular place. And how do we then promote jobs and investment if we don't know where it's actually happening? This is not really well appreciated in policy circles and even amongst some academics. And that's because South Africa does have good household data. I mean, a wealth of household surveys when you dig into Statistics South Africa. But on the firm side of the fence, economic data is comparatively scarce. And when you combine that with the need for spatial economic data, you actually find that South Africa has not had the infrastructure around firm spatial information. And so we've been in a case of garbage in, garbage out, a lot of modeling, a lot of estimation, but needing better data. And so the breakthrough has been from mining administrative tax records. Of course, if everyone is filling out their tax and you're getting this flow of administrative data, what you can do is take it and transform it to actually have a real source of information about the local economy. And this is what we've managed to do. This has been the big breakthrough. And so the database shows 213 municipalities. Of course, it's based on tax records, so it's the formal sector only. But you must bear in mind that the informal economy often follows after formal activity. They're not sort of divided, they work together. And formal sector activity accounts for about 95% of GDP and more than 80% of all jobs. So, you are getting a fairly comprehensive picture of the economy using tax records. What's been remarkable with the data is the ability to use postal codes to even get below the hood of municipalities and for the metros explore what's happening at that neighborhood level. And the data is then fairly current. I mean, it depends on the tax filing, with a plus minus 12-month delay, similar to what you get from Statistics South Africa, but it's also potentially sustainable in that you can rerun the code on the administrative data and it, without all the fieldwork cost, get a new year's worth of input and detailed disaggregation. So this shows you here the data value chain that we comes together, the raw records that are available from the South African Revenue Services, which then are processed in a secure data lab facility run by UN-UWIDA and SARS and National Treasury. And then at the HSRC, we apply the data spatialization and assembly to produce these aggregated spatial indicators, which we can make publicly available. This has been a really collaborative effort that's got us to where we stand today. The primary partnership being led by the HSRC, the National Treasury, and the City Support Program, but a lot of other stakeholders, national partners, technical partners, and also a lot of working with the metros in terms of understanding what their needs are and letting that drive the project and the program. And again, the point of it is not just to produce data for the data's sake, but there's a sort of broader theory of change, where we're trying to, in some sense, change the whole ecosystem around spatial data and understanding the spatial economy in South Africa. So I don't want to take all my time and just talking to you about the project. I'd like to sort of to show you the actual data portal itself. And so here is the spatial economic activity data portal. All you do is you go to www.spatialtaxdata.org.za and you get taken to this portal. And there are essentially 3 points of entry to exploring the data. The third and the final step would be to actually download the raw records as CSVs. All that's required is you fill in your details so that we can keep a track of who's using it and for what purposes, but you get given automatic access, and for those more technical users can then actually use this data for your own research and analysis and policy purposes. But we understand that many people don't necessarily have the advanced data skills to explore the data. And so part of the project from the get-go was trying to understand what we can do to make the data interactive and explorable. And so if you go to our portal, you can see that these two options that pop up. The one is the dashboards and the other is the map explorer. So I'll just take you through a couple of the dashboards to showcase what we've been doing. So when you click on the dashboards, it prompts you to your first step, which is essentially what municipality are you interested in. So you can see here from the drop down, we list the metros first, and the data provides more detail for the metros. And the project was driven initially from metros, but the nature of data is you can very easily start to scale and expand outwards. And so actually we provide information on all the municipalities in the country. Of course, depending on the size of the formal base, also impacts on the quality. If it's a very rural, remote municipality, obviously the formal sector then represents less of what's happening there, but still very useful. So let's just pick a particular metro. Well, let's pick Cape Town, for instance. And we go to the dashboards. And so what we've then done is curated a journey for people to try and help them understand some of the key points or some of the key questions which would go along with the economic tax data. We split it up into 4 dashboards. The first is just an overview. So you can see here, this is just your total jobs growth for Cape Town, simple graph. But we also provide information on the industry structure or the wage distribution. The other set of figures is in the theme or the dashboard of economic growth. I'll click on the first one, that's total jobs growth. And what's nice is that we've put some extra effort into trying to give users some flexibility in how they explore it. So in this case, you can see that it's indexed to 100, so the base year at 2014. From that base year of 100, how do the jobs numbers change? And you can see that by 2020, Cape Town had gone from 100 to 121, so that's a 21% increase over the period. But we can turn on some of these toggles and then say, well, was that good or bad? Well, compared to the rest of the country, it was actually fairly good. You can see Cape Town showing much stronger growth than South Africa. But of course, you might be interested in what else was happening in terms of other metros. So you can turn on the metro button. And the advantage of exploring things online is that you sort of get this interactivity and putting your pointer over certain points and seeing what's happening. You can also change the base year, for instance, if you are looking more at just the period, few years of COVID, for instance. It gives you some flexibility. We've also got a set of industry diagnostic figures for you to explore. So the first one here is just the industry profile. You can see here for Cape Town, now I've got this wagon wheel, and when I scroll over the wagon wheel, I can see the split of jobs, both the total number as well as the percentage. But what's nice is that it gives you that second tier of more detailed information. So for instance, in manufacturing, over here, which is this orange line, we can see it's 11.89% of all jobs, but actually different sorts of manufacturing activities, from rubber and plastics to printing to textiles, and you can sort of get a sense of that second layer. So again, the interactivity is really nice and very simple to use these dashboards. And then last, we also have some information about equitable economies on the wage levels or jobs for youth. I'll click on jobs for youth, and you can see what's happening. At any point in exploring the dashboard, you can click back on the particular place of interest and switch it, let's say to Alfred Duma, and you can see how it changes. So you can quite easily just sort of change your point of reference as you're exploring the dashboards. So that's generally the place to start with exploring the tax data, is just go through the dashboards, because there's been a lot of effort putting into trying to compile figures and analytic tools that make sense. The other, however, is our Map Explorer. And of course, this is spatial information, so you can engage with it spatially on a map. The Map Explorer then allows you to build a custom query. And I'll just show you, for sake of time, just two examples. So the first is we pick, do you want to look within a particular metro, or do you want to look at the whole country? So I'll start with all municipalities. Output is what particular output are you going to see? Are you going to see employment trends, or are you going to see the number of establishments? That's the number of local firms. Are we going to see median income? FTE stands for full-time equivalent. So, and this is just total employment. It's always a good place to start. You can see then our next menu is, do we want to pick tax year or tax month? So, depending on how you want to aggregate it up, we'll keep with year. And then you've got a number of industries, you've got a number of aggregation splits, for instance, trying to drill down into industry or wage band or gender, just depending on what we have available. And let's do nothing. Let's just keep it all aggregated. And let's pick a year, the latest year, 2021. Click display. And here now you can see the map of South Africa with total employment spread across all of our different municipalities. We've also put a lot of effort into the actual visualization. So if you click on this cog here, it gives you more options, and it makes quite a big difference how you want to visualize things with setting max or mins, or the type of scale. In fact, this scale that you're seeing here is a log form. The log basically squashes the tails. If you change it to a linear form, just click linear, you'll see that actually it's quite extreme, because Joburg, for instance, has 2 million employees. If we put my mouse over it, it'll tell me, 2 million formal sector employees. Another way of doing it then is just, let's set the maximum to 200,000. and then you sort of get that sort of difference in the visualization. So there's quite a lot you can do, not just with the data, but just trying to visualize it and make it look in a way which you can engage with. And my last point then would be, if you want to look at it at the metro level, what's really impressive is you click on the metro that you want. We keep the same query, and now you can see we've actually got this neighborhood level information that's in hexagons. If you zoom in here, if my internet connection's a bit better, it should be showing me, oops, yeah, there we go, more detail. You can really see what the area is that that hexagon might represent. Again, the visualization made quite a big difference if you select linear or log. In this case, you can sort of see where the concentration of employment is. And as a final step, let's start to use the power of these different sorts of ways of splitting the data up. So we don't want to just look at total numbers of employment. Let's look at it for certain industries. So if I click industry, now you can see I've got the option to click and select my industry. And I can say, okay, which of these sectors do I want? Okay, let's look at manufacturing. And then it's now telling me, well, do I want to go to level 2? So not only manufacturing in eThekwini, but I can see, well, where is the automotive sector, right? And in fact, you can keep on going down to level 5. So it's really impressive, the detail of disaggregation you can get. So I can confirm that. I need to click display. And now you can see it showing me where the firms, where employment in the automotive sector is concentrated in eThekwini. You can sort of play again with your visualization if you like, change it to linear to get more of a sense of the extremes. I'll keep it on log, it looks a bit better. But this clearly makes some sense. You can see this is the South Durban Basin. You've got Toyota that's based there, for instance. So I'm guessing that's what's driving that spike. You can see 5,925. Yes, I can hear you. You can see then some of the other nodes going on here. This is around the New Germany area, probably sticking out a bit as well, Poundtown, New Germany. Yeah, so in this way, the Map Explorer tool allows you to build your own custom query and play around with it. I've just been looking at absolute numbers, but you could also look, for instance, at an absolute change. So now you just need to input what's the first year, what's the last year, display your visual, and now you're getting sort of change over time. In fact, you're seeing sort of a reduction in employment in that major node. So yeah, this is in a nutshell what you can do with the spatial tax portal. And I will end off, if I can, with one last slide. Mark, do I have time for one last slide?
Yes.
Okay, maybe just some final reflections. So of course, the spatial tax portal has been sort of developed as a channel for access and dissemination, but clearly the advantage is also to empower, particularly what we have in mind is that city planner or municipal planner who might not have the technical skills to work with the raw data, but very easily they can access it and make sense of it using the tools. But a related point is that actually the more platforms, the better. And the approach has been for us to try and create this open access environment of local economic data and try and get it and share it as widely as possible. And what we found is that eThekwini, Cape Town, Western Cape are building their own custom dashboards. So using, for instance, I think Microsoft BI is quite a powerful tool. They actually eThekwini, for instance, construct these different indicators for their line departments, which they can then integrate with their other administrative sources when making decisions about infrastructure, investment, etc., etc. And so that's really exciting. We've also just released the data. You can build tables on the Quantec Easy Data platform. We've always thought that these secondary role players in data, if we can get our data into their hands, that could perhaps be a way of impact. And then along with that has been interesting tools that various, smart people start to do things with. So like GitHub or Streamlit or Observable, people use these different platforms to share what they're doing with the data. And so, for instance, this is designed by a guy at the city of Cape Town, where he created this, fairly sophisticated model of what happened with COVID and exactly which sectors were impacted before and after. And again, it's got some interaction if you go onto that platform to sort of pick and choose. And then also recently, you can't really see it here, but on a platform called Observable, this is a zoomable sunburst where you explore the industry and you click on it, and then it enables you to sort of push down to that very detailed level of disaggregation. So it's been exciting for us to see how the data provides a basis, but other people getting their hands on it can do all sorts of interesting things with it. Which leads me to my last point, which is it would be naive for us to think that just creating robust data is enough. Actually, a lot of the work is in doing training of officials, seminars, facilitating peer-to-peer learning, advocacy, and ultimately, I'm a researcher trying to get it into the hands of the research community that good analysis can be done, which reflects policy. So I think that's it in a nutshell. Thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks, Justin. Incredibly powerful platform. We'll try to share the presentations after the meeting and maybe look at our event page, but we'll also circulate that by email. Brilliant, thanks so much. We'll hear a bit more during the discussion, but really very powerful platform. I'd like to hand over to Amy Peterson next and invite her to talk about the Green Book. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here today and to talk to you about the Green Book. And I think it also ties in so nicely with Justin's presentation of the spatial tax portal. And I'm glad both of us could be here today. So just again, starting at the top, thinking about what our urban context looks like in the context of climate change. What we've seen is that extreme events are becoming more intense and they are occurring more frequently due to climate change. We are also seeing growing and urbanizing populations, and this will continue to place pressure on city economies and local government. And then another aspect is that vulnerabilities are exacerbated as more people and more infrastructure and ecosystems are exposed to climate-related risks. So this is the reality of our urban landscape. We are continuously being exposed to the occurrence of hazards of climate change, and it's driven by economic processes, population growth, and urbanization, particularly in our cities. So the Green Book was developed in response to the pressures faced by local government, and it was developed as a resource to guide informed action and the championing of climate adaptation and response to climate-related disasters. So the Green Book is a multidisciplinary, open access, web-based planning support system that provides evidence to South African municipalities to adapt their cities and their towns to both the current and future climate change impacts based on their risk profiles. The Green Book leverages knowledge and data and technology to drive forward local government change response efforts to manage and to shape resilient and better prepared cities and towns. The Green Book is focused around two objectives. The first is to ensure a reliable and credible repository of climate risk and adaptation information. And this objective is centered around the Green Book as a planning support system to address this need for data as well as for insights. The second objective is to mainstream the Green Book into local government planning. And this objective is largely driven by an external need for, or local government need for information, data and insight, as well as the ability to take that information and to integrate it into planning processes and instruments. Activities around this objective is focused on promoting the use of the Green Book in local government planning, and to build resilience and capacity in local government. But these objectives are mutually supportive, and it's essential to ensure that the Green Book remains credible and relevant to the users and those that are mainstreaming the Green Book and its information into local government planning. But in turn, through the mainstreaming and the training activities on the Green Book, we are able to understand and identify evolving contexts and needs within local government, and then frame our activities around updating and expanding and improving the Green Book. So really through achieving both objectives, there can be improved commitment to using the Green Book outputs in planning and increased use of the Green Book as a planning support system by local government. So that's on the objectives, but what it actually looks like. So the Green Book as a planning support system consists of a number of components, tools, and resources. And some of the interactive tools include the national overview apps that provide national findings and a narrative around key climate impacts, hazards, and vulnerabilities. The municipal risk tool is where all local municipalities, so again, all 213 local municipalities can access the current as well as the future risk profiles in a usable and interactive tool. The Adaptation Actions tool provide access to a library of adaptation actions relevant specifically to local government planning contexts and mandates. And through that, it can be easily integrated into their planning and decision making. Then the Metro View provides, it's a newer component of the Green Book, and it provides more detailed and downscaled climate risk profiles that are accessible for select metropolitan municipalities. And I will also do a short demonstration of one of these profiles. And then finally, the Green Book also offers training to raise awareness and support local government capacity. And the training exists together with more customized and deeper planning support that we offer in collaboration with partners such as DFFE, the Climate and Disaster Resilience Fund, and SANTA. So, and all of the Green Book is accessible through the Green Book website at greenbook.co.za. So I will now go to the website to just give you a brief view of what it looks like, and to do a very shallow demonstration. There we go. So here we are on the landing page of the Green Book, and you can access those different tools that I mentioned here at the top, or you can scroll down. There's also videos on how to use the Green Books, little introductory videos on the Green Book. Here you can access the national overviews that provide that narrative information for various components, including climate change, urban growth, surface water availability, information about flooding and wildfire. And these provide national information in interactive maps and graphs. Then the municipal risk profile tool, which is where each and every single municipality in the country can access their unique profile. And these are also very interactive dashboards that users can navigate through. Data is also downloadable on this page. And of course, the data is out there. It is. And there's information for the baseline as well as for the future. So there's a lot of interactivity in this tool, and as with all the other tools, I do encourage you to explore that if you are interested. Then just going back to the Adaptation Actions tool, also just briefly showing you all the adaptation actions that's available on the Green Book website. They can be filtered. So behind these are a typology that we designed, and all these adaptation actions that are relevant to local government planning can be accessed through the Adaptation Actions tool. Then the Metro View is also available, and I'll go through one of the Metro View profiles in a little bit more detail, but briefly just scrolling further down, you can also access training information as well as information on planning support, and this section is soon to be populated. And again, we have multiple partners and collaborators that were part of the Green Book since its inception in 2016. And we've had more partners come on board since then. So just going to the Metro View quickly. So we have profiles for three metropolitan municipalities. I'm going to just focus on the eThekwini Metro View. So the Metro View really provides downscaled information on climate risk and vulnerability on a very fine resolution, because in the development of the Green Book, we realized that our metropolitan cities are uniquely complex, and a more detailed view of climate risk is needed in these spaces in particular. So all the information on the Green Book, there's an overview section, and then there's a section on climate, on hazards, on exposure, on vulnerability, and then on climate risk zones, which brings together all the previous components in identifying those areas that are most at risk of the impacts of climate change. So there's climate change information broken down by season, by variable, and it's also summarized by region. So at any stage, if you're interested in a region, you can click on the map, and the data dynamically updates throughout the tool. And you can also navigate between the baseline and the future, and again, the data updates. Information is also available on ward format, on ward level. So the information is really very layered, very detailed on a citywide level, on a region level, and on ward level. Hazards that we've covered include flooding, drought, fire, coastal flooding, and heat extremes. The information is also broken down and provided with summary statistics broken down by population, buildings, and roads that are exposed to surface water flooding. And of course, the data is being slow in loading today. But this information is very fine-scaled, and again, it dynamically updates as you navigate to a specific region. The exposure section explores the environmental assets, the roads, the buildings, and the people that are exposed, as well as providing information on informality, baseline informality, and then change in informality over a number of years. Vulnerability, again, it's very high resolution. You can zoom in, the data gets updated, and you can also explore more variables in the tool. Again, I'm going through this quite quickly, but just to demonstrate the level of detail and functionality in the tool. Also then, the novelty of the Metro View is really bringing this all together into climate risk zones that bring together the exposure, the vulnerability, and the likelihood of a hazard to occur across the city. And here we can just see these areas that are highlighted are the areas where one or more hazards overlap with vulnerable people or roads. So the road section is quite small, but here we can see the most exposed or most at-risk people across the city. And if we zoom in, we can have a look at which wards are the most exposed. So here we can see for people that are exposed to one or more hazards. So this can be flooding and extreme heat that they are exposed to. And we can see some wards are particularly exposed. So looking at Ward 78 as an example, we then go to a ward level where all the information that we've seen is summarized. So we can see total population, we can see the population density, number of households, formal versus informal versus traditional dwellings, and this report is also downloadable. And this information is again summarized for vulnerability and for risk, and also for the future. And this particular tool for eThekwini is also supported by a climate actions tool, which is specifically related to the eThekwini climate change strategy. So once we know where who is exposed, what is at risk to be affected by climate change, and where those exposures and risk exist, we can see how can we respond. So the climate actions tool is based on the Durban climate change strategy, and various actions that can be implemented are summarized here. So, for example, just looking at water and sanitation, we can see that the sector, the goal is to provide sustainable water and sanitation services. Here you can see an overview that explains the context around this sector and what the intentions behind it is. There's specific targets, so targets set by the city to achieve this objectives, as well as its linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals. And then you can also see what are the actual programs that need to be implemented. So, for example, to develop and implement municipal climate change actions that respond potentially to amplified flood risk. And here we can see a program description, its benefits, as well as the projects that need to be implemented to support this action. And this is available for all the programs and for all the sectors. And together, the climate risk tool, as well as the climate actions tool, provide access to context-specific and relevant detailed information for eThekwini, and this was developed together with eThekwini, with their close collaboration and their input to ensure that it addresses their data needs, their planning needs, and responds to their policy. Yeah, and the city of eThekwini has also embedded this profile in its strategic hub that Justin also referred to. So they are also already using it. So I'll stop there just to say that, yeah, please do explore the tools, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks, Amy. Wonderful. Right, I wonder if we could just get our panel back in. So it'll be Justin, Amy, and myself just for the next few minutes. And we've got 2 guiding questions. And so this gives the opportunity to expand on some of the broader intentions and some of the broader kind of networks that go alongside these 2 platforms. So maybe I'll start with Amy, seeing we've just presented, and then come to Justin. But the first question is, what kind of outcomes and impacts do you want to achieve through your initiative? So we've heard what the initiatives are, each platform, what they can do. They're very powerful. Actually, we could spend a lot of time just playing with the data, and it's an amazing opportunities. But what kind of change would you like to see as a result of the initiative? And what would the world look like? What would be different if you achieved your aims through the platform? Amy, would you like to kick off with some of those broader impacts, outcomes?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, so I think the aim of the Green Book is really to ensure that climate change is part of the local government agenda, and that they have an improved ability to integrate the data, the information, and the knowledge into their broader planning frameworks. So we would like to see that local government officials use the Green Book and other relevant climate services to make their planning decisions, to design their implementation, and seek or access funding for climate change adaptation. And I think also, given the fact that service delivery is the central mandate of local government and climate change adaptation should really be seen as part of it, we really want to see that the principles of adaptation is integrated into service delivery to ensure that infrastructure is resilient to the impacts of climate change and disasters, to ensure that local government design infrastructure and provide services in a more sustainable manner that is inherently aware of the fact that climate change is having impacts on resources, especially water, and also that we plan in the present with the future in mind and not just being reactive, but proactively responding to change. And at the basis of this is evidence to inform these planning decision makings. So yes.
Just Amy, just to follow up, what about the private sector? What impact does this kind of, because when I look at this, the first time I saw the Green Book, I thought, now, okay, where am I going to retire? And I started to look at the risk and vulnerability around the country. What is the impact of this kind of information into the private sector, not just municipalities and government?
Yes, no, so I think the private sector has definitely really taken an interest in the Green Book, particularly banking and insurance. But not the first thing that comes to mind is, but what are they getting out of it? But what we've seen is the private sector is really invested in supporting our local government so that they are able to minimize their own risks, thereby creating benefit for banking and insurance as well. But the first goal is really to build capacity in local government to ensure that they have access to information and that they are able to use that information to reduce their risk, to reduce their exposure. And the support we've received from the private sector has largely been through corporate social investment and support. And the idea is really that the private sector wants local government to succeed and to become less vulnerable and to have safer cities.
Thanks, Amy. Brilliant. Moving back to Justin and the economic data, so a different type of information, but the same world. What are your? You're a younger platform in the sense of the tool itself and the data now being available that wasn't available before. But what do you see in the future of your outcomes and impacts?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a great question. In terms of our phase 2 funding, which is coming from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, as part of that process, we've had to put together a theory of change and think about, not just the sort of direct outputs, but the sort of outcomes in society. As part of that process, what we've got listed there is, ultimately you want decision makers to be using the tool. And then related to that, you wanted to actually inform policy and planning in a concrete way. So I think if we could achieve that, that really would be fantastic. But in a more informal way of discussing it, I think we see better economic data as a sort of precursor for many other things that need to happen. If you don't have good data, it can be a case of garbage in, garbage out. And as I sort of made the case earlier on, there's a lot of economic data flowing around, and it does actually make its way into a variety of platforms. But Stats SA don't produce local economic indicators, so you have to ask the question, where's it coming from? And none of that commercially available data is actually, there's no methodologies attached. So, South Africa is actually at a lot of risk that we're relying on weak economic indicators. So having said that, a whole spiel, as a foundation, ultimately influencing the actual daily planning and operations, but also for the research community, it would be a really big win for us if this data starts to be used for a whole lot by a whole lot of smarter people than ourselves, because as you know, there are no quick answers, particularly to the economy in South Africa. Actually, a lot of careful, great work needs to be done, but this provides the start to do so. So yeah, I think our ultimate goal is, if our data starts to change the whole ecosystem, that it's not these opaque sources that get integrated in, that actually the tax records get integrated in across multiple platforms and channels, start to appear in academic papers and research. I think for us that would be success. Thanks.
And a similar follow-up, if I go to a South African Property Owners Association conference, they're always poring over data about the state of the economy and what to do next and what to invest in. Do you think the private sector might be alerted or wake up to the usefulness of the data? And how current is it? Is it quite agile? It's not quarterly. How often is it updated? Could they use it as a way to make decisions for investment?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I was very curious to see in Amy's presentation multiple private partners for the Green Book, which we haven't had up until now. So perhaps that's an opportunity for us to explore. I think that the delay of the data is always going to be an issue, but it's the same as what you would get from Statistics South Africa, maybe a little bit longer, but there's nothing you can do. Ultimately, people have to collect the tax. Then from that point onwards, there's delay. So, for instance, we expect in about March, April next year to release the 2022-2023 tax year information. So, you know, it's fairly reasonable. I think where the opportunity is with administrative data is the comprehensiveness or the depth of it. So, you know, we always see what's happening in the manufacturing industry, for instance, but actually, whether you're talking about producing clothing and textiles or cars or heavy manufacturing and steel, they're very different industries with different opportunities. And so the ability to really deep dive into those different sectors, I think, is a great opportunity, and I think something that private players will definitely be interested in, that granularity that we can get. I think a final, though, I have to say a word of caution in that, you know, any data, I think, has to be scrutinized. I work a lot with Stats SA's household surveys, and you'll see that the indicators, unemployment or whatever, it goes up and it goes down. But I think what you want to see is that baseline and that trend over time. And so what we hope through the tax data is it's the opportunity not to have gone into the field once for a big economic census, but actually it's the opportunity year on year to get this census of the economy. And so I think that's a big opportunity that hopefully we'll get a sense of how things are changing over that baseline in the long run, which will add confidence. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Right, so we can go to our second question. I see people are starting to put their questions in the chat. That's brilliant. Please, can you carry on, think of questions to pose. Cesar will take over just now, and we'll have direct questions to the speakers or comments that people want to make. But maybe, Justin, staying with you, we know that platforms, for the second question, we know that platforms are not just what you see online. They're much broader initiatives. Both of you have spoken about the partnerships that surround it. But what other activities, actions? I think in your last slide, Justin, you started to talk about peer-to-peer engagement. But what is the broader engagement that takes the platform into the real world and increases this kind of impact and outcomes that we've been talking about? What are the things either already in place or thought that you're thinking about that strengthen the whole initiative?
Yeah, another really great question. And I think that perhaps it's not a coincidence that we've got the HSRC and the CSIR in the room for this discussion, right? Because I think as organizations, you know, we have a mandate to do applied research, but applied research that will have an influence in policy and in practice. And so I think as an organization, you know, we're always thinking along those lines of not just producing a great paper and getting it published, but actually how can we give it legs and make it work. And invariably, yeah, there's a lot of hard work and just doing advocacy and doing training and showing people, you know, what they can do and how to do it. So we're really interested in using the momentum we've been building for a sort of community of practice. There was something called the Economies of Regions Learning Network in South Africa in the past. Maybe we can revive something like that going forward. But all of this, a big success, particularly of this project, has been that it's been done in collaboration with other strong partners and other strong champions. So the City Support Program at National Treasury in particular has been picking this up and helping. It was our partnership to start off with in 2021 that took it forward. But it was through the CSP actually engaging with the metros themselves who were saying, look, we don't actually have data about where our jobs are or which particular sectors are performing or not performing. That Statistics South Africa doesn't really provide the information we need. So that close interaction between people who actually want to use the data and have an active stake, I think, makes for success. So we do have a project steering committee that meets every three months, and through that platform, which broad representation, you know, we're receiving the input. But it has also come down to finding those champions within the different institutions. Yeah, I'm really proud of what we've been able to achieve through this project. But to be honest with you, it has been just a number of really talented people and who've done excellent work and have led the way. So we've seen in eThekwini, I see a question there about, can you use Microsoft BI and can you integrate it? You can go and look on eThekwini's Durban Edge portal and all the amazing things that they're doing with the data. It's been having people on board like that who've really been able to showcase the data and what it can do. That has been a big win. It's been having SARS, top officials in SARS supporting the project and making sure that, yes, it's sensitive tax data, but we can handle it responsibly. It's been Statistics South Africa as well, seeing the vision moving towards the advantage of administrative flows. I'm leaving some out, but yeah. And we had a launch event, I think, in June. And testimony to that was that we managed to get the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade and Industry. So I think there's been a lot of recognition that better local economic data can make a big difference. And we've had a lot of really excellent champions within these different institutions which have been lobbying and moving us forward. But yeah, still a lot of hard work to be done and just trying to learn from each other, get it out there, advocate. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. I mean, I also came to the launch. It's certainly got off to a flying start. And I think the other thing is, I think both platforms, you don't always appreciate how much work goes into things like making sure the algorithms work, the data visualization, and both platforms are really wonderful ways of seeing the data as well as sourcing the data. But thank you, Justin. Amy, from your side, what are the broader networks, activities, things that strengthen the whole initiative that we don't always see online, but are really making the whole thing much more effective?
I think if I need to pull out one thing from the Green Book initiative that really contributes to it at the back end, is really the co-development and the involvement of multiple stakeholders and partners in the development of the Green Book. So the methodologies we use in the Green Book were co-developed with stakeholders, and the co-production process that we used really ensured that the outputs were relevant to end users, and it also supported the scientific rigor of the process. We also make the Green Book data accessible not just through the Green Book website, but through partner platforms as well. Just a few include the National Climate Change Information System, the South African Earth Observatory Network, the Let's Respond Toolkit. But this way we ensure that more possible users are exposed to the information and that there are multiple access points. We also continuously take part or support awareness raising and knowledge sharing activities. through training and by providing planning support to local government. And this is largely facilitated by our partnerships, such as with Santam, with the Climate and Disaster Resilience Fund, with National Treasury City Support Program, with DFFE, as well as the National Disaster Management Center. But I think it really at the center of all of this is working with our stakeholders, with our partners, with our end users, and making sure that there's a continuous feedback loop between what we're doing in terms of the planning support system and ensuring its relevance and its applicability together with what we're learning from our stakeholders in terms of need and relevance. And then, Mark, as you mentioned as well, a lot of time and effort went into distilling and communicating complex and dense scientific evidence beyond those domain-specific studies and scientific advancements that were made, but to bring it all together and to integrate it into one platform is also something where we invested a lot of our energy.
Yeah, I think that last point you touched on, I think what's not always evident is the amount of climate modeling, for instance, that went in the early days and ongoing to make sure that the predictions are as accurate as possible. There's a huge amount of foundational work that sits behind it. So, yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Nosizo, but just to thank you again. Nosizo will take us through some of the questions and just guide us through the responses to that. But yeah, from my side, thank you so much. And just keep an eye on also the links in the chat, because we also have pages for both of these initiatives on the Urban Knowledge Exchange. But I'll leave that also to Nosizo to help with at the wrapping up time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Amy and Justin. So there are a couple of questions that have come through on our chat. Stanley's one has been answered. So Stanley, I hope you're satisfied with your response. But Bertus, can I invite you to ask your question?
Thank you, Sizo. Yeah, just in terms of when I looked at the opening slide of Dr. Justin, in terms of the two types of residential developments that has taken place, and I saw earlier this year an article on the news, on TV, on the Msunduzi, the informal traders market, and the actual economic turnout that you get from that per annum, and it sounded astronomically, and we're not measuring that. So I think there's a need that we really need to focus on. We can get information in the informal sector, but also to realize that in those two pictures, I think before the informal economy in the informal settlement area, sorry. Can I continue?
If you could please keep your mics off. Yeah, Bertus, you can continue. Thanks.
So I can imagine that the informal economy in the informal settlement, the high density residential development next to the estate development is much more active in terms of what people do and trade on a daily basis. And I think that's a type of information that is important for future planning and development, but also how those contribute not to the national economy, but they contribute into a community on the ground, which we don't necessarily measure. We measure the unemployment rate, but we don't see the impact of the smaller scale economies that is happening at the local level. And in the city of Tshwane, where we have, if you go to the informal settlements or your old township areas, you can clearly see there's a different economy operating there, which I think we need to maybe elevate a little bit higher in terms of what benefit does that give to the residents of such an area. So that was my question in that sense. Thank you.
Justin, do you want to respond to that? I was not going to get that at all.
I think it was more of a comment than a question, but just to say that I agree with the sentiment completely. You know, involved with a lot of work in urban research and getting city economies working. For instance, informal housing, informal rental. And these can be very dynamic spaces and real opportunities. It was always a challenge, though, when it comes to data. The nature of informality is that it flies under the radar, right? And so I haven't had any bright ideas in the middle of the night as to how to access that in a sustainable way, other than to acknowledge that, you know, we need to perhaps have some more systematic, large-scale surveys to be covering the informal sector. But yeah, I would just emphasize the point that, you know, the informal and the formal work together. I mean, there's not this artificial separation. And so I think it's, at least if you've understanding what's happening in the formal economy in detail, can perhaps give some clues as to opportunities in the informal sector. But yeah, big gap and an important one for us to try and fill. Thank you.
Today, don't worry, it's been recorded, and I'll share with you how you can access that after the session. So Tulu, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you for the two presentations. Just wanted to check, does this, are we able to get data up to what level? So that's the question, but also just a general comment, and I'd love to hear your view, Justin. I've always held the view that text data can be quite important for municipalities and metros specifically, for them to be able to plan around how they propose their yearly tariffs. I think we're all aware recently most municipalities have been taken up to court for the justification of their tariffs. Now, if you are able to use the text data to determine what is the LSM levels and the possible affordability of your communities, it goes a long way, in my view, in justifying whatever amounts you come up with in terms of your rates increases. But also, as a last point, I think Mark raised this issue, or it was yourself, Justin. This whole thing that there's a lot of data that's available there outside, and it's not from Status A, but some of these private guys do not want to share the methodology in which they're undertaking. And I absolutely agree with you. It puts the cities at real danger, because you may end up be planning on economic data where you don't know what methodology was used, and if you guys are able to share your methodology as well as part of the peer-to-peer learning, I think that will also be useful. Thank you very much.
So I'll take that as a yeah. You can, if you want to say something back, you're welcome.
Yes, I will. Thanks, Cholofelo, the astute comments. I agree with everything that you've raised. I think that the issue of how to create the data in a format or a shape which is accessible. I hope my connection looks a bit slow. My apologies if you're losing me. Carry on. Is something that's very much on our radar into the future. And so at the moment, we've used those hexagons because we've been limited to the postal codes, which we use to transform into the spatial data. But we actually have a process within SARS to get down to the address level. Although we'll never release address level information publicly because of the sensitivity, that will then give us the flexibility needed to then re-aggregate into these different shapes. So the census 2021 coming up, integrating it there at the small area layer, that could all be really exciting. So that's definitely something on our radar. I do, however, find wards are a little bit too big for my liking. It sometimes groups a poorer area with a richer area, and then when you look at the aggregate results, you know, you've got no chance of really understanding what's going on. So I'd go lower than the ward level, is my personal take. And then last, just to say, I think it's not just about tax data, but other administrative sources. This is the real opportunity. And we are part of a process in trying to think more strategically as a country and support a process of reform so that we integrate multiple administrative sources together, the deeds data, UIF information, tax data, cell phone data. You know, these are all big opportunities, and I think that's where we need to head as a country. The more data, the more integrated sources, the better position we'll be in. So that's the part of the supporting a broader institutional reform. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to sneak a question in. Very practical one. I think there are lots of clever people in the room, and we're going to start using the platforms you've both presented. What's the best way to, or do you have any guidelines on how one can reference these? Because I've seen a butchering of just referencing of guidelines like what of platforms like yours. How is there best practice for citing, referencing each of your platforms? Is there, or maybe links that you can share to citation guidance? Amy, we can start with you.
Okay, yes, so on the Green Book, we provide suggested citations for all the tools and all the resources. So it is available under the resources component, which is under our information component, but also on each of the tools, if you scroll down right to the bottom, you will see a suggested citation. Yeah.
Awesome. Justin?
Yeah, so I'll add, I mean, I think the most important thing for me is that people are using it. So it's a nice problem to have. We have the meta, if you're downloading the raw data, you know, along with that is a metadata document, and in there it tells you how to cite it. It lists the variables in detail, exactly what's in them. But we also have a user guide, which details the methodology. So moving away from this black box we've created, you know, it's been intentional to make it transparent. This is how we are doing what we do to create these spatial economic indicators. So the paper trail is all there. And that's the third window, or the third box you would click on our spatial tax portal to try and download the data. In downloading the data, you get all the sort of associated material to support users. Thanks.
Awesome. I think we can figure a way of putting some of that in our post-webinar content. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just drawing your attention. There's 3 questions from Pierre Potgieter in the chat, and there's 3 from Charles Tom as well.
Yes.
So
I snuck a question in.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, so Pierre, I'll hand over to you.
It's basically just that. Thank you so much. It's very interesting presentations, very nice platforms, but obviously one wants to make this data usable and not constantly have to update it and maintain it locally. So my first question would be about whether there's APIs or web map services to incorporate it in one's own data set, just to be able to combine these 2 data sets from the Green Book and the tax data platform is already, I think, quite valuable. To identify some interesting patterns. That would be my one question. The second one would be about how regularly this will be updated going forward. Amy, I remember when we first met, I think it was around 2014 on the Green Book launch with Wim and all the guys at the CSR that created the platform with you. I didn't realize it was so well maintained, which is really lovely to see. But I would also like to know how the plans are going into the future. Is this going to be regularly updated? I see, for example, the tax data, Justin, goes back only to 2014. Is there a chance we can get a bit of a larger scope, and will it continue in the years to come?
Amy?
Yes, hi Peter. I think first of all, the data download buttons on the Green Book tools take you to web map services. So we're using web map services. I'm not sure about the detail. You can speak to Chantal or Catherine about that, our geospatial scientist. But we do use web map services. And in terms of updates, so we've continually explored updating and expanding components of the Green Book where new methodologies become available, where new data becomes available, where best practice shows that we can improve. And that's also how the Metro View emerged and the development of climate risk zones specifically for the metros. And I think because the Green Book is very much focused on long-term trends, it's slightly more robust in terms of needing regular updates, or definitely doesn't need real-time data, because that's not the intention of the Green Book. But for example, the new census data is something that we're eagerly awaiting to be able to do updates and add more trend points to particularly the vulnerability. So we're always looking at updates, but more so in terms of keeping up to date with best practice, best methodologies, and to make sure that the evidence we provide is world class. Thanks.
Okay, I'll chip in there. One question is around APIs, which sort of automatically then feed and link as you publish the new data. So something we've been thinking about. It might be a little bit over the top in the sense that we only really publish a new year's worth of data once a year, right? So, you have to wait for the tax collection to happen. So it's only once a year that you get the update. Related to that, the data goes back to 2014 because that's when we got the spatial information we needed. Well, that's when that came on record. Before 2014, looking at the trends, it's just a bit unreliable. So that is what it is. But I think that one exciting thing about administrative data is that there are things that you can fix that then happen retrospectively. So for instance, when we improve the geocoding and get down to better address information and give us more flexibility with our shapes and shape files, that then can get applied across the whole database. And then the other thing is looking forward, we can get to a point where we force the tax forms themselves to have drop downs. So for instance, people putting in junk addresses, typing things wrong, spelling things wrong. I think already at SARS they've paid one of those companies for a, you type in your address and it'll automatically populate and make sure it's real. So those sort of things are also opportunities more moving forward. But what we think is really important is that we continue to mine it year in and year so that we continue to get a longer time series, which can really build up momentum. And to be honest with you, it's a fraction of the cost of conventional survey work. I mean, I don't know what the number is for the census 2021, but I think it's in the billions. And here, every single year, we're going to be able to get essentially a census of the formal sector based on tax records. So it's a huge opportunity. And once you've developed the code and the methodology, rerunning it every year becomes really doable. So this has been a large part of the thinking and the partnerships going on between Treasury and ourselves, is building a public sector capability for the long term. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, Amy and Justin. Charles, Tom had a number of comments and questions. I think you've answered some. So Charles, if you want to maybe just go through the last one, unless you... Yeah, the one around the range of data stakeholder.
Thank you very much, and I want to say congratulations to both of you for, well, I know there's a bigger team behind it, but nevertheless, as the presenters, for an excellent job done. And I think Justin, you also touched on a key point: why keep redoing data collection efforts when it can be so much more sophisticated and, like you said, so much cheaper? but I'm a land surveyor and I come from a surveying background. So I was just wondering, when I looked briefly at the platform, I like the sort of spatial economic aspect, and I was just wondering, I didn't see any data on land taxes, land transfers, land development budgets, etc. Is there a reason for not including that, or are there plans possibly to include these sort of income derived from land transfers, the money spent on land transfers, as part of the kind of spatial component of the data? Because I think it would be a very good thematic fit for that. And then also, more broadly, that can also be used for information and decision making on development, land development decisions. When new servitudes are registered or plans are made for new railway lines or transport routes, this is a huge impact on how that land is transacted, and the new rights on the land then can drastically increase or decrease value. So looking at this kind of aspect as well. And then just a very small last question. I just wanted to understand your rationale for requiring users to register, even though the data is quite free and open. I just wanted to understand why the registration option was thought necessary.
Should I go ahead? Yeah. So the short answer to what sort of other data is there and can we access is that at the moment, if it's related to SARS and some form of income tax, in any income tax form, we should be able to get it. And so there's the opportunity. So we've sort of mined what we can, but it's based largely on IRP5 submissions as well as ITR 13, but you can sort of link to other SARS tax forms. Yeah, so that's kind of where the partnership is working. But there's a bigger question of a range of administrative sources. Deeds data, which I assume that a lot of the things you might be interested in would be recorded there. Unfortunately, their model, and I haven't had too much engagement with them, but essentially they have a commercial model where they don't just provide the deeds information freely. And so, that can have consequences. But Statistics South Africa, their new act gives them, I think, legal power to demand any administrative data from anyone. So that's good to know. And I think as well, the Department of Land, Rural Development and Agrarian Reform, I might have the acronym wrong, they also have an act. So I think that there is a process of institutional reform that needs to happen in South Africa where we essentially create this capability of administrative data sources that get linked together, and we use the mandates of these respective departments to essentially demand that you give the data. In this particular project, it's worked because Treasury had a vision and SARS had a vision, and it was supported by Stats SA, and they were able to set up the secure data lab. And so the data we are mining is currently from SARS, but yeah, as you've heard, we have intentions to try and do more than that, but probably will be a slow process. And then the last quick one, why do users have to register to access the data? I suppose largely because our funders, etc., want us to measure impact. And so, one way of, registering, we're trying to just keep a track of numbers. It also gives us information on what sort of policy makers, just getting those information. But if you do it on the site, it's all automatic. So there's you can put in the wrong information, you'll still get given access. So it is another step. And the online tools that are profiled today, there's no requirement to register before you use the tools. It's only when you actually want to download the raw data that we say, please go the extra step to create an account. But yeah, maybe it's something we could think about into the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. So Namgaya, sorry, I'm not going to give you a chance to ask your question, but it seemed simple, so I can read that. And that was just, is the data also available in shapefile format?
I don't know, for Amy,
yeah. Amy, do you have a shape format data or data?
Yes, we
Okay,
do,
so
but we handle the shape file format data requests on a case-by-case basis, but the web map services are really available. But yes, and Jana Mugaya and them have full access to the downscale Metro view for Tswane.
great. Okay.
Yeah.
So
In our
yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, it's always clumsy over these platforms. In our case, the shape files we've created for the tax data is these hexagons, Uber hexagons, and that, as I've said, is because the postal code data itself is fairly clumsy, and we've had to do a fair amount of manipulation to go from the postal code to the hexagon. You, of course, could take those hexagons and arrange them in any shape you want. Whether that would be that reliable is a whole nother question. But ultimately, in the next phase, we're trying to get the better geocoded information from SARS, and that will give us more flexibility for a variety of different shape files. But at the moment, yes, you can get the shape files when you download the data, but they're currently those equal area hexagons. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Justin. Yeah, my biggest takeaway from today's session is that in addition to having partnerships, there's a need to have strong partnerships. And I think both your platforms show the value of having strong partnerships that have champions that can, support the work that you do and also kind of tell others about what you're doing. So yeah, I think I'm just going to wind down with much appreciation to both of you for taking the time to present to us. I hope you've seen the appreciation in the chats. And Justin, there was an invitation from the city of Ekurhuleni. We can put you in touch. I think we've got the contact on our platform. We'll put you in touch with the official from there. And I hope to our attendees that you've understood the platforms, as Mark said at the beginning, that was our intention, is that we hope that you understand what's presented today and that you've appreciated the simplicity of use and are inspired to use this in your own works. We have added a lot of links during the webinar in our chat. But if you've missed any of this, we're going to share. If you're on our mailing list, we'll share with you post the webinar. But keep a lookout on our platform. This very event is on our platform, and we'll have the recording on there for you to have a look at. There's quite a lot that I am going to need to have a look at again. And to Amy and Justin, I hope you're encouraged by the questions that you received today, that there are a number of people, clever people, Justin, you mentioned, that are going to be using the platforms that you've presented today. We're also grateful to the HSRC, Cities Network, University of Free State for co-hosting with us this session today. We are already planning our third one and are looking forward to sharing information on that. So keep a lookout on our platforms. But we do invite you, if you have any interesting platform that you want to showcase on this platform, it is here to serve you. So do reach out and we can start the conversation. And with that, I'd like to thank you and look forward to our next one. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.